"Did you enjoy the condo, Mom?" my son asked over Thanksgiving dinner, and for a moment, I thought I had misheard him. The dining room was warm with the smell of roasted turkey, sage stuffing, and sweet potatoes glazed with brown sugar, but his question sent a chill through me that no amount of heat could touch. I looked up from my plate and found Ethan smiling at me from the far end of the table, proud and expectant, as if he had been waiting all evening for me to say the right thing. The candlelight caught the gold rim of Vanessa's wineglass just as her hand tightened around the stem. "The condo," Ethan said again, laughing softly. "The one I bought for you near Lake Mercer. You said you always wanted somewhere quiet with a view." I set my fork down carefully. My fingers were suddenly unsteady, though I kept my face calm. "Ethan," I said, "I never got any keys." The room went still in a way that didn't feel natural. Not the comfortable silence of family gathered around a holiday table, but the brittle kind, the kind that makes you hear the hum of the refrigerator from 2 rooms away. Vanessa looked at me then. Not with surprise, exactly. More like calculation. It was a look I had seen before in smaller moments and dismissed, because I wanted peace more than I wanted truth. She recovered quickly, of course. She always did. "Maybe you forgot, Margaret," she said, her voice smooth as polished glass. There were so many things happening that month. I turned my eyes to her, and then back to my son. "No," I said quietly. "A woman doesn't forget being handed the keys to a home." Ethan's smile faded, though he tried to hold it in place. "That's impossible," he murmured. "I had everything taken care of. The down payment, the title work, the moving allowance. I wanted it to be a surprise." I stared at him, at the man I had raised in a little 2-bedroom ranch house after his father, and I counted every dollar for 20 years just to keep the lights on and food in the pantry. Ethan had done well for himself. Better than I ever dreamed. At 38, he wore success as naturally as other people wore sweaters. His watch probably cost more than my monthly rent. His house, with its stone fireplace and oversized windows, looked like something out of a magazine. And for the past 2 winters, I had been stretching my blood pressure medicine, cutting pills in half, telling myself I was just being practical. Vanessa gave a small laugh. "Too light, too fast. Maybe the package was sent to your old address first," she said. "Or maybe the front desk signed for it. These luxury buildings are always so confusing." But Ethan wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking at me. Really looking at me. At my coat folded over the chair by the kitchen door, the same wool coat I had worn for 6 winters. At the careful way I had declined a second glass of iced tea because I didn't want to ask for anything extra. At the truth sitting between us like a 4th place setting no one had planned for. I picked up my napkin and laid it beside my plate. "I never got keys," I repeated. "I never got a deed. I never got a welcome packet. I never got anything." Vanessa's face did not fall apart. It hardened by 1/2 inch. That was all. But 1/2 inch was enough. In that moment, with the Thanksgiving candles burning low and my son's expression turning from confusion to something much colder, I understood that this was not a misunderstanding. Something had been placed in my name. Something had been kept from me. And someone at this table already knew exactly where it had gone. After that, I did what I had done my entire life, when something painful threatened to spill into the room and ruin what everyone else wanted to call a nice evening. I became quiet. Ethan tried to laugh it off at first, the way people do when the truth arrives wearing clothes no one expected. He reached for his glass, took a sip of water, and glanced at Vanessa as if she might hand him an explanation he could live with. She offered him one immediately. She said there had probably been some mix-up with the property manager, some clerical issue, some annoying little mistake that had dragged on longer than it should have. Her tone was light, almost amused, as though inconvenience were the worst thing that had happened. But I had spent 68 years around people, and I knew the difference between confusion and control. Confusion asks questions. Control rushes in with answers before anyone else can think. I sat there with my hands folded in my lap and let them speak. That was when I noticed something else. Ethan kept using details no one invents. He mentioned the monthly homeowners association fee. He mentioned the reserved parking spot. He even smiled, faintly, and said he hoped I liked the little balcony because he remembered how much I had always loved sitting outside with coffee in the morning. Each detail landed inside me with a weight I could not describe. This was not a dream he had once had and forgotten. This was real. Somewhere in the world, there was a condominium with my name tied to it. A balcony I had never stepped onto, a front door I had never unlocked, and perhaps a stack of unopened mail that had never touched my hands. For a moment, I was not in Ethan's gleaming dining room anymore. I was back in my own apartment, standing in the weak morning light coming through cheap blinds that never sat straight. My place was clean, but age had settled into it the way dust settles into the corners of things no one moves anymore. The radiator knocked all winter long. The kitchen floor had a soft spot by the sink. Last January, I wore 2 pairs of socks inside because I was trying to keep the heating bill under $200. I had learned to shop on Tuesdays because the grocery store near me marked down produce that morning. I bought soup when it went on sale and stretched it over 2 meals. I told my doctor I was doing fine. I told Ethan I was doing fine. I told myself that pride and peace were cousins, even when they were not. After my husband passed, I had promised I would not become a burden to anyone. It sounded dignified at the time, noble even, but there is a quiet danger in making yourself too easy to overlook. People begin to accept your silence as proof that you need nothing. Ethan knew I had downsized after Harold died. He knew I had sold the house. He knew I was renting. What he did not know, because I had not let him know, was how carefully I had been measuring every week of my life. How I had stood in the pharmacy once, calculating whether I could refill a prescription and still have enough left for gas. How I had sewn the lining of my coat instead of replacing it. How I had smiled during our short phone calls and said things like, "Everything is under control, sweetheart," because a mother does not stop wanting her son to feel safe just because he is grown. Back at the table, Ethan's face had changed. I could see him adding things together now. The old car, the apartment, the coat, the way I never accepted help unless it came disguised as leftovers or holiday gifts. Vanessa must have seen it too, because she leaned in and touched his wrist with a little reassuring smile that never reached her eyes. "Let us not make this into something dramatic on Thanksgiving," she said. That was the moment I knew she was afraid, because innocent people want the truth cleared up. Guilty people want the timing to be more convenient. That night, I did not stay long after dessert. Ethan offered to pack leftovers for me, and I let him, mostly because I wanted a reason to stand in that bright kitchen and watch the two of them move around each other. People reveal themselves in the ordinary seconds. In the way a wife answers before her husband can speak. In the way a husband glances toward her before finishing a sentence he should be able to own by himself. Vanessa wrapped slices of pie with neat, efficient hands and kept her smile in place, but it looked tighter now, as though she were holding it there by force. Ethan asked me twice if I was warm enough for the drive home. That alone told me his mind was somewhere else. He had started to notice things. A mother knows when her child is troubled, even when that child is nearly 40 and wears his worry behind a polished watch and a tailored sweater. I thanked them both, took my container of leftovers, and walked out into the cold November air with my shoulders straight. The sky was clear, black as velvet, and the wind had that sharp edge it gets right before winter decides it is done waiting. My old sedan started on the second try. I sat in the parking area for a moment with my hands on the wheel, letting the heater cough awake, and replayed every word from the table. The condo, the balcony, the parking space, the monthly fee. Those were not the kind of details a man invented to sound generous over turkey and cranberry sauce. They belonged to something concrete, something processed, something signed. On the drive back to my apartment, memories began rising on their own, quiet little moments that had not seemed important when they happened. About a year ago, Vanessa had asked, in that sweet, careful tone of hers, whether I was still getting too much junk mail at my place. She said she worried about scams targeting seniors. I remembered laughing and telling her I threw away most of it unopened. Another time, she had offered to help me organize my paperwork after I mentioned how cluttered my kitchen counter had become. She stood in my apartment with a stack of envelopes in her hands and told me not to worry about the boring parts of life because family should make things easier. I had thanked her. I had meant it. There had also been the Christmas card from Ethan that arrived already opened, slipped halfway out of the envelope, as if the flap had simply given up. Inside was a generous gift card and a handwritten note that said, "Use this for something comfortable for your new place." Vanessa had laughed when I mentioned the torn envelope and said the postal service could not do one thing right anymore. At the time, I believed her. Why would I not have? Suspicion is not a natural home for women like me. We are raised on benefit of the doubt. We survive on keeping the peace. By the time I pulled into my building's small lot, I was no longer thinking in terms of mistakes. I was thinking in patterns. My apartment looked the same as it always did when I opened the door. Quiet. Neat. Faintly scented with lavender from the candle I saved for evenings when the rooms felt too empty. I set the leftovers in the refrigerator, hung up my coat, and stood at the sink for a long moment staring at my reflection in the dark window above it. Harold used to say I had a face that gave too much away, but that was never true. Not really. What I had was a face. People underestimated because I did not use it to threaten. I made myself a cup of decaf, sat at the little table by the wall heater, and took out the folder where I kept my important papers. Rent receipts, insurance notices, prescription summaries, tax returns. Everything was there, clipped and dated and in order. Everything except any mention of a property. No welcome letter. No deed copy. No homeowner document. No package slip. No keys. At 10:30, my phone lit up with Ethan's name. I let it ring once before answering. His voice sounded low, careful. He asked if I got home all right. Then he asked whether I was absolutely certain. I told him yes. There was a silence on the line that felt heavier than the one at dinner. When he finally spoke again, he said he would look into it first thing in the morning. I believed he meant that. What I did not tell him was that I would be doing the same. The next morning, I woke before sunrise, the way I always did when my mind had latched onto something it refused to release. The apartment was cold enough that I could feel the November air pressing against the windows, and for a moment I lay still beneath my quilt listening to the old wall heater click and rattle itself awake. Then I got up, put on my robe, and began the quiet routine that had steadied me through widowhood, downsizing, and every disappointment I had learned to carry without complaint. I filled the kettle. I fed the small fern on the sill with the last of yesterday's water. I opened the blinds and watched the parking lot slowly turn gray. But even as I spread a thin layer of jam over toast and waited for my tea to steep, my thoughts kept circling back to the same place. Somewhere there was a home meant for me, and somewhere between my son's intention and my real life, that home had disappeared. By 8 o'clock, I had dressed, pinned my hair back, and pulled my folder onto the kitchen table. I added a yellow legal pad, 2 pens, and the reading glasses I only wore when numbers mattered. Then I made a list. The bank, the county property records office, the main office for the condominium building, if I could find the name. Ethan's assistant, if I could get her number without involving Vanessa. I did not write Vanessa's name on the list. I did not need to. She was present in every blank space. At 8:15, my phone rang. Ethan. His voice sounded rough, as if he had slept badly. He told me he had gone through his email after dinner and found the original transfer documents from 14 months earlier. The unit number was there. The closing date was there. The address was there. He said the title company had copied him on everything, and the final message included a note that the welcome packet and key set had been delivered by courier 3 business days later. I closed my eyes and let that settle. Delivered to whom? I asked. He hesitated. It says signed for, he said. I am trying to get the signature page now. He was breathing too carefully, the way people do when they are trying not to show panic. I could hear movement in the background, drawers opening, a cabinet door shutting. Then Vanessa's voice floated faintly through the phone, asking whether he wanted coffee. Ethan did not answer her right away. Do not worry, Mom, he said. I am going to fix this. I thanked him, because there was nothing else to say yet. But after I hung up, I sat very still at my table with the steam from my tea fading between my hands. Fix this. Men often say that when they finally see damage, as if damage begins the moment they notice it. Women know better. Damage begins quietly. It begins in permissions, in access, in trust handed over because love makes it feel safe. Around 9, I called the county records office and got a patient woman named Denise who spoke with the steady kindness of someone who had explained the same process 1,000 times. She asked for my full legal name and the property address once I had it. I told her I would call back. Then I searched the address Ethan had texted me and found the building online. It sat on the edge of Lake Mercer, all clean lines and glass balconies, with a lobby that looked brighter than any place I had lived in since Harold died. There was even a small fitness room and a walking path by the water. Ethan had remembered more. Then I thought, not just that I loved coffee outside, but that I liked morning light and quiet views and places where I could walk without feeling hurried. For one painful second, I let myself imagine what it would have felt like to be there these past 14 months. To wake to water instead of a parking lot. To have a safe building, a proper elevator, a mailbox I did not have to jiggle open with both hands. Then that feeling passed, replaced by something firmer. Grief can soften a person, but it can also sharpen her. At 10:30, I called the condominium office. The woman who answered introduced herself as Paula, the property manager. I gave her my name and unit number and said I believe there might have been an administrative issue with an ownership packet. There was a pause, then the unmistakable sound of a keyboard. "Ms. Collins," she said, "the ownership file shows your unit as owner-occupied until 6 months ago." I felt my fingers tighten around the phone. Owner-occupied by whom? I asked. Another pause, longer this time. When Paula spoke again, her voice had changed. It was more careful now. "I think it would be best if you came in and brought identification." I wrote down the appointment time she offered me for that afternoon, then hung up and stared at the legal pad on my table. Under the neat line where I had written condo office, I added 3 new words in capital letters. Someone lived there. By 1:30, I was driving toward Lake Mercer with my folder on the passenger seat and my yellow legal pad tucked beneath it like a witness waiting its turn. The day had turned clear but cold, the kind of late November afternoon when the sun looks bright without offering any real warmth. The building rose above the water in pale stone and glass, elegant without trying too hard. I parked in visitor spaces marked with crisp white paint and sat for a moment with the engine off, looking at the balconies facing the lake. One of them was mine, or had been, or should have been. Even then, I still did not let myself feel the full measure of that. I had learned over the years that hope can be as dangerous as grief if you let it run ahead of facts. The lobby doors opened with a soft motion when I stepped inside. Warm air wrapped around me, carrying the scent of lemon polish and something floral from an arrangement on the entry table. The floors gleamed. A gas fireplace flickered against a wall of stacked stone. Everything about the place felt cared for. Intentional. This was not some impulsive gift chosen by a wealthy son who wanted to feel generous for a season. Ethan had planned this. He had chosen a place where he believed I would be safe, comfortable, and near enough to visit. That hurt more than I expected. Not because he had forgotten me, but because he had not. Paula met me in a glass-walled office just off the lobby. She was in her 50s, with sensible shoes, silver-framed glasses, and the expression of someone who liked order and did not enjoy surprises. I handed her my identification, and she compared it to a file on her desk. Her brows lifted almost at once. "You are Margaret and Collins," she said. "Yes," I answered. She turned the monitor slightly, not enough for me to read everything, but enough for me to see my name in a property record. Then she took a breath and folded her hands. "Miss Collins, according to our system, Unit 11B was transferred into your name 14 months ago. The original owner welcome packet was released by courier, and the access credentials were activated within 48 hours. I felt my heartbeat climb, though my voice stayed level. Activated by whom? Paula looked at the screen again. The entry fob was issued under resident authorization connected to the owner file. The emergency contact listed was Ethan Collins. The day-to-day resident contact was updated later. She paused. Vanessa Collins. I did not react outwardly. Years earlier, when Harold was in the hospital, a doctor once told me I had an unusual ability to stay calm during bad news. It was not calm, not really. It was suspension, a kind of stillness that lets truth land before pain begins moving. Did she live there? I asked. Paula chose her words with care. I can confirm that your unit was marked owner-occupied for 8 months and then changed to tenant-occupied for a shorter period. After that, it was listed as vacant pending renovation access. The mailing preferences also changed more than once. My fingers rested on the arm of the chair so lightly they could have belonged to anyone. Was my signature ever provided in person? I asked. No, Paula said. Everything in the initial onboarding appears to have been managed remotely, with supplementary authorization documents uploaded afterward. She slid a copy request form toward me. I cannot release everything without a formal records request, but I can provide occupancy dates, building correspondence logs, and a list of authorized contacts. I filled out the form in steady handwriting. Margaret and Collins. Unit 11B. While I wrote, Paula opened a folder and glanced through printed notes. There was one incident, she said carefully. A front desk associate documented a conversation about 6 months after move-in. The resident presenting herself as Mrs. Collins's family representative said the owner was elderly, preferred privacy, and would not be using the unit personally due to health limitations. I looked up. I never said that. I did not think so, Paula replied. That was the first moment all day that I felt something hot move through the cold center of me. Not rage. Something cleaner than that. Recognition. The story had been built piece by piece, using my age as a tool and my silence as cover. Vanessa had not merely intercepted a gift. She had rewritten me into someone easier to manage. Someone absent. Someone frail. Someone who would not show up in person with identification in her handbag and a spine that still held. Paula printed several pages and tucked them into a plain folder. As she handed it to me, was time. When I stepped back out into the lobby, the building no longer looked elegant. It looked complicit. The polished floors, the bright lake beyond the wind near the city. Later, a man started visiting too. He was not your son. The words landed without drama, which somehow made them heavier. Lydia was not trying to wound me. She was simply placing facts on the table, one by one, and letting them remain facts. Are you certain? I asked. I am, she said. I never saw anything inappropriate. But I saw enough to know she was using the property as if it belonged to her, and I never once saw anyone who matched your identification photo. Outside, the lake was silver under the pale afternoon sun. A pair of geese moved across the water in perfect silence. I thought of Ethan at his dining table, talking about balconies and parking spaces and monthly fees, so certain his gift had reached me. I thought of Vanessa touching his wrist, smoothing over the edges of truth as if truth were just another wrinkle to press flat. Lydia lowered her voice. There is one more thing. About 6 months in, there was a delivery mix-up. A framed photo was brought to the desk. It had your name on the package, but when the wrapping loosened at the corner, I could see the inscription on the back through the paper. It said, "For Mom, so your mornings by the lake never feel lonely. Love, Ethan." I did not trust my voice then, so I only nodded. For a moment, the room seemed to tilt slightly, not from shock this time, but from the shape of the loss. My son had not forgotten me. He had tried to care for me in ways I never even knew existed, and someone had turned that care into a private convenience. Lydia reached into a drawer in the side table beside her chair and pulled out a business card. On the back, she wrote a date and a time range. That is when I last logged her entering with an overnight bag and a second key set, she said. If Ethan needs someone to confirm the pattern, I will do it. I took the card and slipped it into my folder. The paper felt small in my hand, almost laughably small for the weight it carried. When I rose to leave, Lydia stood too. I am sorry, she said. I looked at her, and, for the first time that day, I let the truth come. All the way through me. Not loudly. Not with tears. Just clearly. So am I said. But not for the reasons she thinks. On the drive home, I did not turn on the radio. I wanted the silence. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because silence had become useful to me in a new way. It was no longer the quiet of loneliness. It was the quiet of pieces settling into place. By the time I parked outside my apartment building, I knew 2 things with absolute certainty. First, Vanessa had not stumbled into this by accident. Second, Ethan still did not know the whole of what had been done in his name. That mattered. It mattered because truth can harden a person or break him, and I had no intention of letting my son hear it in fragments from the wrong mouth. Upstairs, I set Paula's folder and Lydia's card on my kitchen table beside my legal pad and made myself another cup of tea I did not really want. Then I began arranging everything by date. The transfer documents Ethan had forwarded, the county confirmation, the occupancy notes, the authorized contact changes, the package logs, the overnight bag entry Lydia had written down in neat, slanted numbers. When I was finished, the timeline lay before me like a clean seam running through a torn garment. Vanessa had intercepted the welcome packet. She had inserted herself as resident contact. She had used my supposed frailty as a shield and my absence as permission. Then she had lived there. And when it suited her, she had let someone else visit too. At 5:20, Ethan called again. His voice was different this time. Stripped down. No smooth edges left. He said he had obtained the courier receipt and the signature page. The signature was not mine. It looked like an unreadable flourish, but the printed line beneath it listed family representative. Ethan said he had also checked the utility account history and discovered that the billing address had been updated twice, once to a post office box and once to an email alias he did not recognize. He stopped speaking for a moment, and when he did, I could hear the change in him. The part where disbelief had finally given way to shame. "Mom," he said quietly, "why did you never tell me things were that tight for you?" I looked around my apartment as if the walls might answer for me. The dish towel drying over the oven handle. The lamp Harold once repaired with electrician's tape because he could not stand waste. The little stack of store coupons by the fruit bowl. "Because," I said, "you were building a life. And I did not want my needs to become another obligation on your calendar." He exhaled hard, almost like a man who had been struck by something he could not see coming. "You were never an obligation." I believed he meant it. That was the tragedy of it. Good intentions are not protection against weak attention. Vanessa had not needed Ethan to be cruel. She had only needed him to be busy and trusting. He asked where I had gone that afternoon. I told him. There was a long pause after I mentioned the building, and a longer one after I mentioned Lydia. When I told him the unit had been listed owner-occupied and later used by Vanessa, he did not interrupt me. He did not defend her. He only listened, and sometimes listening is the first honest thing a person does after a long period of not seeing. "I want to talk to her tonight," he said. "No," I replied. "Not yet." He sounded startled. I understood why. For most of his life, I had been the one urging patience, smoothing conflict, asking everyone to let things cool down. But patience is not the same as passivity, and cooling down is useless if the fire is hidden in the walls. "If you confront her now," I said, "she will deny, delay, and destroy whatever she can before morning. You need facts in your hands, not anger in your throat." There was another silence. Then, slowly, he said, "You already know what to do not you?" I looked at the papers spread across my table and thought of the balcony by the lake, of the framed photo he had chosen for me, of the life I had continued missing while my name opened doors for someone else. "Yes," I said. "I do." We agreed on one thing before hanging up. The next day, Ethan would come to my apartment alone. He would bring every document he had. I would bring mine. And together, before Vanessa heard a single word more than necessary, we would build the truth so carefully that she would have nowhere left to stand except inside it. The next morning, Ethan arrived just after 9 with a leather document case in one hand and a face I barely recognized in the doorway. He looked older than he had on Thanksgiving, not in years, but in certainty. Some of the easy confidence was gone, and in its place was something harsher and more useful. He stepped into my apartment, glanced around as if seeing it properly for the first time, and set the case on my kitchen table beside my folder. "I should have come here sooner," he said. I did not answer that. There was no point. Regret has a way of wanting immediate forgiveness, and I was not in the mood to make things easier for anyone. I poured coffee for him and tea for myself, and together we laid out everything we had. Email confirmations, courier receipts, building records, utility changes, contact logs, Lydia's note, my legal pad with dates written in a careful column down the left side. We worked for nearly 2 hours in the quiet, the only sounds the turning of pages, the scrape of chairs, the kettle settling on the stove. Once, Ethan covered his eyes with one hand and stayed like that for several seconds after reading the note about me being elderly, private, and too unwell to use the property myself. When he looked up, there was something almost unbearable in his expression. "She used you," he said. "She used the one person I thought was beyond being used." I folded my hands around my teacup and held them there. "No," I said. "She used what you failed to notice." He flinched, and I let him. Truth should land where it belongs. By noon, the facts were no longer loose pieces. They were a structure. Vanessa had intercepted access. She had presented herself as my representative. She had occupied the unit. She had altered contact information. She had accepted deliveries intended for me. Ethan had already called his attorney before arriving, and at 12:15, that attorney called back. Her name was Rebecca Sloan. Her voice was calm, direct, and entirely unimpressed by personal excuses. She asked Ethan to email every document immediately and advised him not to confront Vanessa without preserving access records, account history, and any devices or accounts that might still hold relevant communications. She also suggested something else. "If the property is legally in your mother's name," she said through the speakerphone, The cleanest next step is to regain physical possession of the unit, change access, and document condition before anyone is alerted. Ethan looked at me. I looked back at him. Today, I said. By 1:30, we were standing once again in the lobby at Lake Mercer. Paula met us with the professionalism of someone who had already decided where fairness sat in this matter. She led us upstairs. Unit 11B was at the end of a quiet hallway with soft carpet and a window facing the water. When she opened the door with management access, I did not step in immediately. I stood on the threshold and took in what should have been mine. The place was beautiful. Light spilled across hardwood floors the color of warm honey. The kitchen had white cabinets, brushed brass fixtures, and a bowl of decorative pears sitting untouched on the island, as though someone had staged comfort instead of living it. The balcony doors framed the lake in a broad sheet of silver. For one disorienting second, I felt gratitude before I felt grief, and perhaps that was the cruelest part. Ethan had chosen well. He had known me well. He had simply trusted the wrong woman to stand between intention and reality. Then I began to notice the details. A throw blanket in a shade Vanessa favored. Scented hand soap I had smelled in her guest bathroom before. A framed abstract print leaning against the wall, still not hung. In the bedroom closet, several empty velvet hangers and one dry cleaning bag from a boutique I knew I could never have afforded. Ethan moved through the unit like a man trying to keep himself from breaking something. He opened drawers, checked cabinets, took photographs exactly as Rebecca had instructed. In the hall closet, he found a small locked file box and stared at it for a long time. "Do not open it yet," I said. "Photograph it first." He nodded. My voice was steady because steadiness was serving me now. We had almost finished documenting the living room when the elevator at the end of the hall chimed. Footsteps followed. Quick, familiar, confident. Then Vanessa appeared around the corner, holding a garment bag over one arm and a tote on her shoulder. She stopped when she saw us, standing inside the open door. The color did not leave her face all at once. It retreated in stages, like a tide going out over stone. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then her eyes moved from Ethan, to me, to Paula, and finally to the management key still in the door. She smiled. Not warmly, not convincingly, just instinctively, as if a smile had gotten her through so many moments before that her body no longer knew what else to do. "What is going on?" she asked. Ethan did not answer. He stepped aside instead, and in the silence between us, the condo finally felt like what it had always been meant to become. Not a secret, not a convenience. A place where the truth had arrived first. Vanessa stood very still in the doorway, one hand wrapped around the strap of her tote, the other still holding the garment bag, as if she had simply arrived at the wrong floor by mistake. But mistakes look confused. She did not look confused. She looked cornered. Ethan was the first to speak, and when he did, his voice was so calm it made the room feel colder. "Put the bag down," he said. Vanessa gave a short laugh that did not sound like hers. "Ethan, whatever you think this is, there is an explanation." Paula quietly stepped back into the hall, giving us privacy without leaving entirely, and I appreciated that more than I could say. Good people know when to witness and when to disappear by half. Vanessa set the garment bag on the floor, but she kept hold of the tote. Her eyes flicked toward the kitchen island where Ethan had arranged the copied documents in a neat stack. Then they moved to me. For the first time since I had known her, she did not speak to me in that careful tone she used when she wanted to sound respectful, without ever surrendering control. "Margaret," she said, "I was trying to help." It was such a small sentence for such a large theft. I looked at her and realized that she truly expected those words to soften something. Maybe they had worked before. Maybe that was how people like Vanessa moved through life, forever trimming their own choices into shapes that sounded reasonable after the damage was done. Ethan picked up the courier receipt, then the building occupancy log, then Lydia's handwritten note. He did not wave them. He did not raise his voice. He simply placed each one on the island between them as if laying down cards in a game that had finally stopped pretending to be friendly. "You signed for property that belonged to my mother," he said. "You used her name. You changed contact information. You lived here. And you told building staff she was too unwell to use her own home." Vanessa's face tightened. "I never said it like that." "You said enough," I replied. She turned toward me quickly, almost sharply, then seemed to remember where she was and slowed herself down. "You were not using it," she said. "You were in that apartment by choice." Ethan was busy, and someone had to manage everything. The condo would have sat empty. I have heard many ugly things in a long life, but there is something especially chilling about hearing wrongdoing described as efficiency. Ethan stared at her as though some final veil had lifted and left him with a stranger wearing his wife's face. It was not yours to manage, he said. It was hers. Vanessa's fingers tightened around the tote. I was protecting the asset, she said. For the family. I almost smiled then, not because anything was funny, but because greed always reaches for noble language when the room turns against it. Family. Protection. Help. As if changing names on records, intercepting gifts, and building a private little life inside someone else's generosity could be washed clean by the right nouns. Ethan took a slow breath and stepped away from the island. Rebecca is changing all access today, he said. Management has already been notified. You are going to leave the keys, the fobs, anything connected to this unit, and you are not coming back here unless my mother invites you. Vanessa looked at him then, really looked at him, and I saw the exact moment she understood this was not one of those scenes she could smooth over with a practiced apology and a softer voice. You are taking her side? She asked. Ethan did not blink. There are no sides when the facts are this clear. She stood there for another second, then opened the tote and slowly placed 2 key fobs, a ring of keys, and a small envelope on the counter. Inside the envelope was a photo in a silver frame. I picked it up with careful hands. It was a picture of Ethan and me from years earlier at a lakeside diner, both of us squinting into summer light, laughing at something I could no longer remember. On the back, in his handwriting, were the words Lydia had described. For Mom, so your mornings by the lake never feel lonely. Love, Ethan. I held that frame for a long moment before setting it down again. Then I walked to the balcony doors and opened them. Cold air rushed in off the water, clean and sharp and honest. Behind me, I heard Vanessa gather her things and leave. No slammed door. No dramatic final words. Just the quiet sound of someone losing access. Ethan remained where he was for several seconds after the hallway fell silent. When he finally came to stand beside me, he looked out at the lake and said, very softly, I do not know how to make up for this. I kept my eyes on the water. You do not make up for time, I said. You learn from it. He nodded, and after a while he placed the keys in my hand. They were lighter than I expected. Silver, simple, ordinary. Nothing about them suggested the months they had cost me. I closed my fingers around them and stood there in the doorway of the life that should have begun long ago. The lake moved under the winter sun. The unit was finally quiet. And for the first time in a very long while, what lay ahead of me did not feel like loss. It felt like a door opening.